Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of my podcast, Grit Stories of Resilience. Today's guest is someone I literally have known all my life. He is my older brother, Glenn, 3 years older. We grew up together in the town of Wake Forest, moving to Winston-Salem in the summer of 1956. Both of us went to high school in Winston-Salem. He graduated from Reynolds in 59. I graduated in 62. He graduated from Wake Forest in 63. I graduated in 66. He goes on to become a Fulbright scholar, having majored in philosophy at Wake Forest, at the University of Edinburgh for a year. Comes back to North Carolina and goes to Chapel Hill, where he becomes a doctor, Glenn Blackburn, with his doctorate in history. Spends over 30 years at the University of Virginia at Wise, professor of history, dean of the faculty for at least 5 years, retires and moves to Holden Beach, except he doesn't really retire. He is the writer of several books, one about an eminent philosopher at Chapel Hill, Maynard Keynes, a biography, and then the book Saving Great Places, which it says in the opening to the book, an historical account of the men and women who fought to protect the coastal waters of North Carolina. But I want to start with this introduction and let you know that we're going to talk about Wake Forest University, then Wake Forest College, the early 1960s, integration of Wake Forest, the invitation to dinner with Martin Luther King Jr., and Bird Island, and the Mailbox of Kindred Spirits. Glenn, welcome. It's good to talk to you today.
Thank you. Nice day on here. We had a big storm yesterday, but the sun's out now.
Well, it rained like a son of a gun here, and all of a sudden, about noontime, there was a tornado watch, but nothing
Yeah.
happened, as far as I know. Well, it's
We
good
had a
to,
lot of wind and lightning down here.
yeah. And for down here, just so people know, down here is Holden Beach, North
That's
Carolina, where
right.
he and his wife Jerry have a home. I was looking, Glenn, this morning about some information about Wake Forest and the African Student Program in 1961. And it gives a timeline that in 1958, two American blacks applied for admission to Wake Forest and were denied. 2 or 3 years later, the first Native American was admitted to Wake Forest. In April of 1960, you read this line that Glenn Blackburn Jr. formed the African Student Program that brought about ultimately the integration of Wake Forest. Glenn, in April of 1960, you were 18 years old, for goodness sakes.
Yeah. Yeah.
What on earth made you 4 years out from the town of Wake Forest, more than a year from a graduation in high school? What motivated you to start this particular program, which led to the integration of Wake Forest?
Well, a group of us were sitting around. I think we were in Davis Chapel one evening, and our advisor, a guy named Kenneth Keaton, who was taught German at the college, said, "Why don't you do something?" I said, and everybody said, "What? What?" And that was just after the sit-in movement had started. He says, "Why don't you do something to follow up on the sit-ins? Do something to integrate Wake Forest?" And we decided, well, maybe we can try to do something. And I ended up being the chair of the program. There were a hardcore about 6 or 8 people who were there who wanted to do something. We didn't have the slightest idea what we were talking about. We had no idea what it would involve to bring an African student to this country to go to Wake Forest. It was just a shot in the dark. And it turns out, of course, we had lots of people around the college who could help us, who had the expertise to help us. And that would make the program work. But one of the secrets here is people rarely start doing something big if they knew beforehand what all the consequences would be. That was us. We didn't have any idea what the consequences would be. We just thought we ought to start something.
Well, what did you do first? What happened after you met in Dave's Chapel?
Well, that it was almost summertime. It was just me. All the other kids had gone home. It was just me, and I didn't really know what to do. But finally, somebody said, "Go talk to Mac Bryan,
Who's
religion
Mac
part."
Bryan? Yeah, Mac Bryan was in the religion department,
He was
right?
a religion department and was well known for being very liberal, and also well known for pushing for change at the college. And he said, well, I do have some contacts in Africa, which he did. He knew some missionaries there. Why don't you think about bringing an African student here with the strategy of saying we send missionaries to Africa to convert people to Christianity, but we won't let them come to our college. That could be a powerful argument. Say we're going to convert them in Africa, but we ought to let them in here too. And that's what got us started. I think Brian was a big help at the beginning.
Did he sort of wind up being a sort of a faculty advisor to you?
Very informally, yeah. He advised us a lot the first year or two, uh, and we knew he was sort of a. Some people thought of him as a campus radical. He wasn't very radical, but he was for that day and time, pretty liberal, and he did help us.
Well, how did you go about contacting a missionary in Africa?
He did it for us. He was a personal friend with a guy named Harris Mobley, who was a Baptist missionary in Ghana. And he made the original contact for us. And then I wrote several letters back and forth to Harris Mobley, and he knew Edward Reynolds, who was one of his students in Africa. And Edward became, of course, the student country and was the first black student to attend Wake Forest.
Were you worried that you might get someone from Ghana to come to the United States, but that you would have trouble getting someone admitted to the university or the college?
I'm not sure we were smart enough to worry about that. I think we were almost flying blind. We'll get him over here and say, here he is. He's a protege of a Baptist missionary in Ghana, and he wants to go to school here. We will, in effect, stand him up in front of the Board of Trustees and say, why would you not admit him? We will try to embarrass the board into doing something. That was the whole strategy, and it eventually worked.
It didn't work the first year, did it?
No, Edward had to go to Shaw University in Raleigh the first year he was in this country. That was in 1961, 62. And by that time, Ed Crispin was helping us, and he had some contacts at Shaw and helped arrange Edward's entry into Shaw University. And that's where he went for the first year.
Who was Ed Christman?
Ed Crispin was, at that time, he was I don't know, the BSU director, and maybe he became the college chaplain very quickly. And of course, Ed was he was the icon around Wake Forest for 50 years, knowing everybody, and he was an exuberant, friendly, gregarious kind of guy. A lot of people will still remember him, I'm sure, but he was a big help to us in 61 and 62.
Did you ever go to any of the trustee meetings?
Yeah,
It
I spoke to the trustees at least twice. Dr. Tribble, who was the president of the college, uh, arranged for me to speak to the board, and the speaking was never more than a minute or two, but I did speak before the board, and I suspect that Tribble was sort of using that approach to slowly put some pressure on the board. Here's a group of students, and they aren't going to go away.
was Dr. Tribble, you think, quietly on your side?
I think he was. He could have thrown up a lot of roadblocks in our way if he'd wanted to, and he never did. I think he was supportive, but he wasn't going to say that publicly.
Right, right. How did you learn that Wake Forest had decided to accept Ed Reynolds?
I don't really remember, except it had to be a vote of the Board of Trustees, and I think somebody in the president's office simply called me and told me. I think it was very low key.
Was Ed still then a student at Shaw, I guess?
Yeah,
So he comes to, how old was Ed about that time? 19 or 20?
yeah, yeah. He was college age.
Right. Was he a smart guy?
Well, he got a PhD from a California university, so he must know something.
There you go. That's right.
He became a college professor himself,
What did he teach? Didn't he teach history?
African history.
Okay.
African history and the slave trade and all that sort of thing. He was well into African affairs.
Okay. Well, how was the response from your fellow students? I know you had a core group of 5 or 6 people. I guess Joe
Yeah.
Klontz and people like that.
Joe Klontz was one, Sammy Williams. There was a girl named
Was it Eva?
Sharon. I've forgotten her last name.
Eva Lilly was one, wasn't she?
Yeah. Uh, Glenn Ham, I remember his name. He was very helpful. There was a hardcore, and then there were at least, I don't know, a few dozen others who were supportive in various ways and would be helpful. And the old Gold and Black, the campus newspaper, was very supportive. I can still remember, I think it was Lynn Smathers was the editor, and she was running to me on campus every once in a while. Says, "What can we do to help the African student program?" And she would produce an editorial in support of the movement. The old Gold and Black was supportive.
That was no
There
small,
was what?
that was no small thing at all.
Yeah, there were a lot of other people who were not supportive, but there was never very much open opposition.
Sort of quiet opposition. How about the
Yeah.
faculty?
There was a lot of support there. One of the ways we financed all this, we decided we were going to ask people to donate $25 to support the program and bring it and pay for Ed's travel across the ocean and going to Shaw and all that. $25 was a lot of money in that day and time. I
Yeah.
had a good friend who went through Wake Forest on $15 a week. That was had to pay for his food and his laundry. So 25 was a pretty sizable donation. There were a lot of faculty, younger faculty, who contributed that $25. I forgot how many. It was several dozen, and we could raise several $100s quickly.
How about Dean Wilson? He was dean of the college at the time. Was he helpful to
Yeah,
you?
I'm sure he was helpful behind the scenes, but I don't remember any open help. Uh, I to, to that there's a story though that he and Ed Chrisman served as waiters in the Magnolia Room one evening and gave all their tips to support the African student program, something like that. I didn't know
That
anything about it at the time.
I got to tell you, I knew both Dean Wilson, of course, and Ed Wilson. I mean, and Ed Crispin very well. I'd be very scared if I was a student and having either one of those guys wait on me. I tell you. But anyway, so Ed comes to Wake Forest. Was he accepted pretty quickly into classes by the students?
Yeah, he roomed with Joe Klontz.
Right.
Uh, yeah, they had a suite of 8 guys, and they were all perfectly friendly as far as I know. And he went to classes uh, with, as far as I know, without any problem. I I'm sure Ed Crispin was advising him on what professors would be openly receptive to having him and that sort of thing. And there were some faculty who were dead set opposed to integration. There were some others who welcomed it and wanted it to succeed. And so I'm sure there were some professors where uh, where he was welcome.
I think that in my junior year, stayed in the same suite that he had lived in earlier because Barry Dorsey and Ross Griffith were in that suite. And I think they were original suite mates of Ed and Joe
Yeah, yeah,
when he first came. Let me ask you this. He's admitted in the fall of 1962.
right.
In October of that year, just barely more than a month later, you are head of the student committee on lectures, bringing people to the college to speak. Tell me about the person that spoke to Wake Forest in October of 1962.
Well, that was Dr. Martin Luther King. I Kelly Griffith had been the chair of the lecture committee the year before, and he had made the original contact with Dr. King, and King was receptive, and so I renewed the contact, uh, and we worked it out, and we paid him. I'm pretty sure we paid him $400, which will tell you something uh, about finances in that day and time. And I I drove over and met him at the airport. Oh, here's the story. About a month before King was to come to Wake Forest, he had been giving a talk in some place in the deep South, and some guy had walked up on the stage and stuck a knife in Dr. King, tried to kill him. And it was a very famous episode around the country because King never lost his composure, and he asked the man what his problem was, and the poor man started crying and all that sort of thing. And King survived. He wasn't hurt too badly, but that scared the FBI. They were afraid somebody was going to turn Dr. King into a martyr. And so about a week before he was to come to Wake Forest, I get a call to come to Dr. Tribble's office. I go in there, and Dr. Tribble is in there with 4 or 5 men wearing coats and ties and white socks. I remember that. They were FBI people. I figured that out pretty fast. And they wanted to have a plan for what to do if somebody came up and tried to assault Dr. King. And the plan was that if anything happened, and I believe it was Russell Brantley, who was going to sit on the front row of the chapel. If he stood up, I was supposed to immediately grab Dr. King, go out the back of the chapel, and there would be an FBI car out back with a motor running, and they would escort him off campus. And that was the plan. And after I got through the meeting and walked out, I realized there was a problem with this plan. They were planning to leave me there. And so if there was a riot or something, I was supposed to take care of that. I said, the heck with this. I went back to Dr. Tribble's office and say, we need to work on this plan some more. And the FBI guys already gone. They'd already left. But that was the plan. As it turned out, nothing happened. Everything was fine. Dr. King gave a speech. There was a standing ovation and all that.
Was he the first black to ever speak in Whitechapel? Or do you know?
Uh, Yeah, he may have been, and I think that was the first time that any local black people from Winston-Salem were invited to come onto campus to hear a speech. I think it was the first time there was an open invitation to black people to join in. About 2 weeks before Dr. King came, I got a phone call from somebody who refused to identify themselves, saying, "Can anyone come to that speech?" Of course, yes, it's open to the public. Are you sure? Yes. Are you absolutely sure? What's wrong with this guy? Oh, he takes over. I'm pretty sure that was a black person from Winston-Salem who wanted to be sure he would be welcome on campus.
Well, you had dinner with Dr. King and some other students, I take it, in the Magnolia Room. Is that right?
Right. That's right.
What was, without trying to get it on the couch too much, was he pleasant with you all? Did conversation go easily? That sort of thing. How was that? Did it make you feel strange to sitting next to him, or in the terms of he was well known and famous?
It turns out he was hungry. He hadn't eaten all day, and he wanted that food. He didn't talk a whole lot because he was busy eating, but he was pleasant. He was pleasant enough, but he was hungry.
And then the two of you, did all of you go across the quad
No,
to
just the two
chapel?
of us went across the quad, and I took him into the chapel to see it so he could see, where he was going, and then he went. We went into an office back in Wade Hall so he could relax before the speech. That's all it was. It was just me and him.
Was that Dad's office that he went
Yeah,
to?
yeah, it
Um,
was. And
yeah.
here's another little touch that people might be intrigued. When we got there, at least an hour before the talk was scheduled, there were already several dozen people there, all of them black people, and they were all sitting in clusters of 4 or 5 people sort of scattered around the auditorium. I was trying to figure out why they scattered out. And it finally hit me that was their strategy. They were still not sure they would be welcome, and if somebody came to get them to drag them out of there, they will make it as difficult as possible by being spread all over the auditorium. Which
And
I
how
thought was
large?
cool.
Yeah, yeah. How large? Wake Chapel seats over 2,000 people, doesn't it? I think it does.
Right, right.
So, what was the effect, do you think? Was it a good effect that he came to speak at Wake Forest? Do you think that helped the cause of integration at all?
I think he did. I think there were a lot of students who were sort of proud of the fact that we could have Dr. King on campus and the whole thing could go well. And he gave a good speech. And I think there were a fair number of people who were sort of proud that it happened.
Was there any theme to his speech there that you might later hear in Washington on the March on Washington or anything like that that you can recall?
No, it was his typical speech for that day and time. He had a standard speech for a lot of these occasions, talking about. I'm sure he said "we shall overcome" somewhere in there, and he was using those standard tropes. But I don't remember hearing anything like "I have a dream." That "I have a dream" speech. I don't. That did not was not there.
Okay. Okay. So, looking back to that time when you were a college student and your time from 18 to 22, I guess, does it amaze you what you were able to accomplish, or do you think it was serendipity? How do you put that in the context of being a college kid? Most college kids don't. You did.
Yeah. Well, the timing had to be right. Uh, that was a very exciting time in right
Excited,
when I started college, the civil rights movement was really going. And
right?
the first sit-in demonstration was in the winter of 1960 when I was a freshman at Wake, and that sort of blew things up. And after their first sit-in, 2 weeks later, there was another second sit-in involving some Wake Forest students and some Winston-Salem State students. They sat in together. And so that was a very exciting time. We knew it was exciting. We knew something important was going on.
Well, yeah, I got in trouble probably. I read somewhere after Bob Grant and Butch Henry came a year or two later, they were football players, that he
That's
would
right.
oftentimes walk in Reynolda Gardens with one or two of those students, players, asking their advice and how they were doing, that sort of thing, if they were getting along okay. So he must have been at least receptive to some degree to help you all.
Yeah, he was. He was. The entire administration was receptive. Ed Wilson was receptive. Uh, a number of younger faculty were very receptive. The faculty and administration of Wake Forest never put up any roadblocks.
That's really remarkable. I want to switch uh, just a moment and go forward to a few years ago. After moving to Eastern North Carolina to the beach, you became fascinated or interested in the North Carolina Coastal Federation. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
What is what is the Coastal Federation? What does that do?
Well, they say the statement they always make is that their goal is to protect and restore the North Carolina coast. There's been enormous development on the North Carolina coast with big houses and big hotels, condos, and all that sort of thing. And they would, what the Federation would like to do more than anybody else is protect the water and the land, so the coast can remain a great place to be. Uh, Jerry and I heard about the Federation, somewhere over 20 years ago. I don't, probably in a newspaper article or something like that. And we got in touch with them and found out a little more about it and became really interested in it, in what they were doing. And a few years later, it's all of a sudden hit me that I'm a historian. Why not do a history of this little organization? So there's a memory of it. And the center of it, of course, was Todd Miller, who founded the Federation in 1982 with almost no money and then led it for over 40 years. He's now sort of semi-retired. He's still working full time at the Federation, but he's one of the most extraordinary people I've ever known. Very intelligent, very driven, uh, and accomplishes things. He gets things done.
Yeah, you write in the book, Saving Great Places, about four or five instances. Uh, the cement plant in Wilmington, or
Yeah.
African Americans on the Lower Cape Fear, or fishing communities and things like that. And these are all successes, I take it.
Oh yeah. 5 big environmental battles, and they won all 5 of them.
Let me ask you this: what do you think? What lessons can a person learn from an organization which starts out with no money to fight against industrialization or going against the big guys? How does that happen? How do people with little money and support initially succeed?
Well, it starts with having some local people who are angry about something, uh, and are willing to fight back a little bit. Let's see. Here's a quotation from the book from a guy named Bill Ducker, who was head of the Bird Island Preservation Society. And after the fight was over and they had won, here's what Bill said. all of us are stewards. You can fight City Hall, you can win. It takes two things. In all these battles, it took two things. It took some local people who were really upset about something and wanted to do something to fight back. And then they have to have the support of the Coastal Federation. They have to make an alliance with the Federation because the Federation had the knowledge to know how to fight back. And they had the contacts with attorneys, environmental attorneys who would know how to fight back. So you need both things. You need the passion of the local people and the knowledge and expertise of an organization that can help them accomplish what they want to do. When that Bird Island fight started, Todd Miller had already had a good 10 years of experience in knowing how to fight coastal battles, and he steered the whole campaign.
He was one particularly responsible, wasn't he, for helping secure the safety of Bird Island. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Where is Bird Island?
Bird Island is the southernmost island in North Carolina. It is so close. It's the westernmost part of it sticks into South Carolina. It's right next to the South Carolina state line. Sunset Beach is the southernmost beach community in North Carolina. Lovely little place. And from Sunset, you walk about, a mile straight west and you hit Bird Island. And if you cross Bird Island, you're in South Carolina. That's how far south it is.
What's on Bird Island? How does it get its name?
Well, it's a small island, and because it's uninhabited by humans, and so it became a kind of habitat for birds. Uh, Nothing unusual about that. It turns out there are several bird islands in the United States, all scattered up around the coast, and each one is known only by local people. But Bird Island is sort of a name for a place that's left in its natural state. And so it became home to birds, to sea turtles, rabbits, who knows what else.
There's a line in your book where it may have been from Bill Drucker that you mentioned, or someone else, where you thought you might lose Bird Island to uh, development, in which he says something like this: the birds can't talk, so we won't hear them complain, but we will miss them when they are gone.
Yeah, that's Bill Ducker said that.
Who is Frank?
Frank Newsmith.
Yes, who is he?
Oh, he's a character.
Is
Uh,
he is he still
he
with
lives
us?
no, he died a couple of years ago. He was not well over 90 years old. Uh, he grew up in southeastern North Carolina, and as a young guy, started coming to what is now Sunset Beach so he could fish. And then there was nothing on the beach then, no houses or anything, and he just wanted a good fishing place. And after Hurricane Hazel blew away whatever little shacks there were on the beach, it was called Ball Beach then. Uh, After Hurricane Hazel, his family built a house on the mainland overlooking Sunset Beach, which is a small island. And over the years, he came to be almost the historian of Sunset Beach. He knew everybody, knew everything because he was a very gregarious kind of person, loved to talk to people. And he knew everything. And in the late 1970s, he and his girlfriend, his then girlfriend, Claudia, put up the first Kindred Spirit mailbox. They put it out on sand spit on the eastern side of Sunset Beach, The sand spit washed away very quickly, so they went and got it, and he put it in his boat, took it over to the west end, and put it up, which is where it remains today. That's where it's always been on the west end. It's now on the west end of Sunset Beach. That was sometime in the late 1970s. And he then started putting little notebooks in there so people could go to the mailbox and write down whatever they wanted to about their lives or their friends or whatever. And he, over 30 years, he kept supplying little notebooks to the mailbox so people could write in them.
What happened to the notebooks?
Nobody knows. He for a long time he just simply gave them away to anybody who wanted them. And I finally told him, you know, Frank, there's a good library up here in Wilmington at the university. Why don't you give those notebooks to the library? And so future generations can see about the Kindred Spirit mailbox. And he agreed with that, and they eventually turned over several hundred notebooks. I'm sure there have been thousands of notebooks over the years, and nobody knows where a lot of them are. They just disappeared into history. But there are hundreds, many hundreds, in the UNCW library.
Uh, who named the mailbox the Kindred Spirit mailbox? How did it come up with the name Kindred Spirit?
That was the name was given by Frank's girlfriend, Claudia. And she was the name. She said the name to her meant just the feeling of being at a nice, quiet beach. We were kindred spirits with the beach. And over the years, I got changed so the kindred spirits became all the people who visited the mailbox and wrote in the notebooks. But the name came from that woman who I think died just a few years ago. I never met her, never saw her. I don't even remember her last name.
Right, right. Looking back, there was a struggle that lasted close to 10 years, I think, where a wealthy lady from Greensboro,
Right.
uh, tried to organize and set up a gated community on Bird Island, which would have taken away perhaps the turtles and the birds and maybe even the mailbox. What happened about that?
Well, she was doing what people have been doing on the coast for the last 50 years. You find a nice little piece of beach, say, I would like to build some homes there, build a little development. And that was a perfectly natural thing to do. Uh, Except that Bird Island is so fragile that it, it was there was a piece of federal legislation called COBRA, Coastal Area Barrier Act, or something like that. And it said that some places on the coast are too fragile, so the federal government will not give any federal services to support building on those islands. What that meant was that there could be none of the ordinary electrical service to the island, so she would have to build her own electrical system, her own telephone system to the island. That was one issue. The other issue was that she had the perfect right to build on the island. Everybody agreed on that. What she did not have was the right to get to the island, to get the transportation to the island. And to do that, she wanted to have a route to drive through Sunset Beach and then build a mile-long causeway to get to it. And the problem was that causeway would go over Mad Inlet, and the inlets have a history of moving on the coast. They don't stay in the same place. All the wind and water just pushes them back and forth. And so the question became, building a causeway over an inlet, what do you do if the inlet moves? Do you build another causeway? Do you build another bridge? What do you do? And so she had to get state approval to do all that. And the state eventually turned it down. The state has a long history of saying that building anything over an inlet is a bad idea. And the only one, I think, the only place where there's a bridge over an inlet, I think, is on the Outer Banks, the crossing Oregon Inlet up there. And that was a crucial issue, and she lost the fight.
Who owns Bird Island now?
It
Is it
belongs, the state bought it, and it belongs in the North Carolina Coastal Reserve now. There are about 10 places that are on the coast maintaining this reserve program, and they're kept in their natural state.
well,
So
the
we all
mailbox
own it.
the mailbox is still there.
Mailbox is still there. It was the big rallying point of the Bird Island fight. There were so many thousands of people who over the years had walked to the mailbox to leave a note in the book. They all supported the Bird Island fight. That's where all the support came from.
Well, it became famous in a couple of novels, I think, that were written about using
Yeah,
that
there
as
was I think CBS did a segment on it one point, and PBS did a segment on it at one point.
okay. Looking back, I know that you have written about the philosopher at Chapel Hill. You have written about saving great places. You were responsible in large part to help start the integration at Wake Forest. What are you doing now?
Well, there's another book coming out, and we've just sent it to a designer to work it up and make it look nice. It's called A Spectacular Coast and Its Guardians. It's about the Coastal Federation, all the conservation and educational work they've done over the years. And they've done a lot in that score. And they're working now on a program to conserve salt marshes along the coast. And anyhow, it's about the history of the Federation over the last 40 years and all the long-term programs they've done to try to protect and restore the coast. A spectacular coast and its guardians. It'll be out within a year.
Well, that's great. Glenn, I just think it's been a remarkable run that you have had, starting when you were 18 years old and going on into the present time. I think it's just amazing that all the things you've done, as I've said before, that not many,
It's
that,
interesting.
yeah, it is. And I'm amazed that there's something must run in our family that as we get older, we don't stop doing stuff. It's
Yeah.
uh, it's pretty good. Thank you so much for being with me today. I appreciate it. I think people are going to really enjoy it, hearing a firsthand account of all the things we have talked about today.
Well, I enjoyed it.
Good. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody for listening. And I hope you've enjoyed it. And we'll see you next week on another edition of the podcast Grit Stories of Resilience. Thanks.